Okay, another round of applause to our students from Thailand. You'll be interested to know that this cultural performance are not only performed by students from their culture, this is also taught to other students that represent other countries that are present here at BYU Hawaii. Our next performance are students from Malaysia. Please put a round of applause for Malaysia Club.
Kaansayan rapamahunan may pansiranganan rakayahan hilira saumipan ulun amahun rapamahunan ika inaya rasaumi nirandi ika inaya rasaumi
Thank you, Malaysia Club. Our last performance for this evening will be from the Philippines Club. Round of applause for our Philippine clubs, ladies and gentlemen. Another round of applause for our student performers. Thank you, Philippines Club. Ladies and gentlemen, our dinner will be served shortly. And while we wait for that to be served, we invite our student presenters on the stage. This will be our next panel. So students, please make your way up. Ladies and gentlemen, as you enjoy your meal, we'll begin with the student panel. I will introduce the students in the order that they will be presenting. After the presentation, then we have a short Q&A if you have any questions. First off, we'll hear from Vilai. And Vilai is from the Kingdom of Tonga, and he just graduated just last semester. And he majored in political science with a minor in music. Our second student presenter is Joseph Sant, and he's from the United States. And he is double majoring in political science and intercultural peace building. Our third student presenter is Ravi David Jerry, and he is a senior from Malaysia, majoring in human resource. The following is Deneille Martin, a student from Malaysia as well, and she is majoring in business management, human resources. Following is Ayu Kartika Sari, and she is from Indonesia, double majoring in computer science and applied mathematics. And then our following presenter is Hannah Kola, and she is an intercultural peace building student, also majoring in political science. And then our last student, Samantha, she is also majoring in political science with minors in intercultural peace building and communication. We'll turn over the time to Vilai. And just as always, if you have any questions, you can always ask on the Hoover app. And if not, then we can also ask at the end of the presentation. Vilai.
Esteemed delegates, honored guests, and friends and family who are visiting BYU Hawaii. Before I continue on with this presentation, it would be amiss of me to say thank you for being here. And I want to express my gratitude to each and every one of you here. As a student panelist, we are grateful for the time that you have to be here with us and for the time that we have to be of service as you visit our wonderful shores here at BYU Hawaii. To start off, my research project, I'm really Polynesian, so we don't like research. I think more reading is interesting to some, but for me, as long as I get the job done, I'll get it done. But my research was based on the impacts of religious freedom on corruption. So I was thinking, if religious freedom is the ability and allowance of free worship, the freedom of right to worship, are there any consequences? And would those consequences have a correlation in any means to corruption? So with this little qualitative research I've made, I've discovered that scholars have actually touched on this. So starting with my research question, I asked, is there a relationship between religious freedom and corruption? And how much of an impact does religious freedom have on corruption? In pursuing this topic, I wanted to understand more on the definition and how religious freedom is measured in most countries. And through religious freedom and human dignity, I was able to receive the resources, the initiative here on campus, which was provided by Jonathan Fox, who had a definition which says, religious freedom can be defined as the right for everyone to be able to practice their religion, as well as set up and maintain religious institutions without government interference. Fox 2015. So, if this is the right that we all have as human and an inalienable right, is there any consequence when we take it too far? That was the question that posed strongly on my mind as I researched. Some concepts and perspectives. All the religions in the world encourage moral and ethical behavior. However, belonging to a religious group does not necessarily imply full obedience and practice of the teachings of that group. Just something to food for thought, not trying to offend anyone here or any one belief, but just from what I've studied so far, this was how I discovered how other scholars were able to measure the correlation between corruption and religious freedom. And I came to two contending arguments. The first argument was that empirical evidence indicates that religiosity, rather than religious affiliation, impacts corruption levels. In a sense, the more religious a society is, the higher the corruption, regardless of religious affiliation. The second argument I found to be contending this argument was that religious freedom does not influence corruption, but dominant religions in nations have influence over corruptions instead. And these were certainly interesting studies. And in order for me to answer this nuance of a perspective, I decided to look into another scholar's research, who stated that there were three main situations in all these cases. One is that religious identity usually overlaps with race and ethnicities. Second, control of religions by centralized states. And third, countries with clear secular and democratic base. So, in conclusion of the research that I've found, is that there will always be an argument on whatever human rights we have. And a question I'd like to pose today is not one to provoke any ill intention, but one for thought in terms of our human nature and our human rights as God-given. Is religious freedom a human right that all enjoy? Or does it depend? And if it does depend on other factors, is it no longer a freedom for all? Thank you very much for your time.
Aloha, everyone. I am very grateful for this opportunity that I have to share some of the research and some of the things I have learned here at BYU Hawaii with all of you. My research is focused in Cambodia, and I hope to be able to bring more peace and justice and healing, especially to those who have been affected by terrible conflicts in Cambodia. And so one of the most well-known events in recent history is the Cambodian genocide. One of the most well-known events in recent history is the Cambodian genocide. And while some steps have been taken towards justice in Cambodia, the people deeply connected to these issues will be helped by implementing restorative justice principles through a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And so I'll discuss a little bit more about all of that right now. As many of you know and are aware of, between 1967 and 1999, there's nearly continual violent conflict in Cambodia, from civil wars to political coups in the government. There was a lot that went on in these years, especially the Cambodian genocide, where more than 2.5 million people died in just those 4 years, which was nearly a quarter of the Cambodian population at the time. And so, as I mentioned, I hope to bring an idea of a solution that can help many of the people in Cambodia who have suffered so much. And so, as I mentioned, there were some things that have been done. There's a joint UN Cambodian tribunal that was formed in 2003, and many of the leaders were tried in this court. However, only 3 have been sentenced to prison. There were many that died while they were in the process in the court. And the last one, there were 2 that were sentenced in 2014. According to a study that was done in 2018, more than 80% of the Cambodians could not name a single project that was done to help with healing or reconciliation. They didn't even know they weren't aware of what was being done to help them personally to heal. And in addition to that, many of them did not have a chance to share their experiences with others. The joint UN Cambodian tribunal did interview some people who were affected. However, they did not interview very many people that were compared to the population that was affected. Those that were interviewed or had the opportunity to share those experiences, 80% of them said that it was a positive experience and that it helped them to heal. And of the interview that was done, 61.3% wanted a Truth and Reconciliation Commission established. And I believe that establishing a Truth and Reconciliation Commission would allow the communities in Cambodia to heal in a more uniting way. And so going on, talking a little bit about what a Truth and Reconciliation Commission is, Dr. Androff, who's a scholar on Truth and Reconciliation Commissions and restorative justice, has said that Truth and Reconciliation Commissions have emerged as a restorative justice-based alternative to assist societies in confronting their past and are now considered a core transitional justice intervention. TRCs are adaptable and temporary bodies that are meant to guide healing and truth-seeking for a certain amount of time. They're not a permanent establishment in government. They're just temporary to help people to experience healing. And they also are adaptable and depend heavily on local traditions and cultures and the local contexts that apply. And additionally, they provide a platform and a space for the silenced voices of victims, for those who haven't had an opportunity to share what is going on. And so after their years of research are done, they will present their findings in a final publish that in one final report, and it'll be used to educate society on what has happened and also to provide and suggest solutions for what they can do in the future to bring more healing. So going on about examples of restorative justice and Truth and Reconciliation Commissions in the past, South Africa is the most famous example. They successfully used the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to bring healing to a country that was torn apart through racism and violence. In addition to this, that inspired many other countries to adopt a similar practice, such as in North Carolina and even in Canada. However, as I mentioned, the South Africa TRC was the most successful one, and it included many cultural principles, which is vital to restorative justice. An important example that I wanted to talk about was in East Timor. They had a TRC. They were occupied by other countries, and they were colonized for many years. And after all the things that happened there, they gained their freedom in 1990, and they established a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to help bring healing to this nation that was affected as well. When talking about it, Dr. Androff said that this committee fulfilled the restorative justice principle of restoring human dignity to victims by eliciting their stories and acknowledging their suffering through their testimony at public hearings and in their statements. So through these public hearings and through giving these people the opportunity to share their stories and acknowledge their human dignity, they were able to bring healing to these communities. This specific Truth and Reconciliation Commission included a unique aspect, which was the Community Reconciliation Process, or the CRP. And this helped them to fulfill their purpose. It was more focused on the communities that were affected rather than a large-scale nationwide tribunal. And I think that applying a similar TRC in Cambodia would help to bring healing to that nation. The CRP meetings, the Community Reconciliation Process meetings in East Timor, were very specific to the cultures and the communities, and they focused on the individual villages. Dr. Michael Wessels, who specializes in these conflicts and in the community reconciliation process, has said that an essential first step, one that required taking an anthropological perspective, was to understand how local people and the formerly recruited young people themselves understood the problem. By applying a more community-focused TRC, they'll be able to better understand what happened in the communities and how they can bring healing to those people. Moving on, another important thing that would be important in this TRC is to include the religious principles that are practiced by the majority of Cambodians. The majority of Cambodia is Buddhist, and by applying these specific Buddhist principles and, as I mentioned, the community reconciliation process, they can bring this more healing. It can be, instead of a blanket diagnosis for the whole nation, individuals and their communities and families will be able to get this healing that they desire. David R. Loy, who is a scholar on Buddhist belief, theory, and tradition, has explained clearly what some of the perspectives of justice in Buddhism are. He first mentioned that they are taught that the solution is not to crack down harshly with severe punishments, but to provide people with their basic needs. And by providing them with their basic needs, they'll better be able to experience healing and justice at the same time. And I believe that the same can be applied in the TRC in Cambodia. If it were to happen, that it would be able to provide the basic needs for the people, and which would help to cultivate that culture of healing and peace. And lastly, I think that this TRC would benefit the young and upcoming generation in Cambodia. Many of them have been affected deeply, even if they were not present during the civil wars and during the genocide. They are still affected today by what has happened. And by applying this TRC and giving them a voice in the process, it would help them to become agents of peace, which can be one of the best means for breaking the intergenerational cycle of violence. And it will also have a powerful effect on the individual communities. So in conclusion, by applying the principles of restorative justice and Buddhism in a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, many more Cambodians will be able to find peace and resolution from a conflict that they are deeply connected to. Thank you for listening.
Hi everyone. Hi everyone. Thank you for being here. Sitting here, my heart was filled with gratitude. We are so grateful to be able to represent BYU Hawaii student, and also a student that coming from the Southeast Asian country. So we are grateful to sharing our research with you guys. So my name is Ningtyas Kartika Sari. I'm from Indonesia, and I'm presenting today with my research partners here, Deneille and Raj from Malaysia. So our study is titled how could teaching a world religions course in public secondary schools promote human dignity in Malaysia and Indonesia? So we were inspired to explore this topic because both Malaysia and Indonesia are incredibly diverse nations. They are home to multiple religious groups: Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and various indigenous beliefs. Despite this rich diversity, religious education in public schools often focuses on one dominant religion. While this approach has its historical and cultural roots, it can also unintentionally limit students' exposure to other worldviews. This can lead to misunderstandings, religious stereotypes, or even conflict. So we asked, what if public secondary schools offered a course on world religions? One that doesn't promote any specific belief, but instead teaches about different religions in an informative and respectful way. Our goal was to understand whether such a course could help students become more respectful, more tolerant, and more aware of human dignity in a diverse society. In other words, can education be a bridge toward greater interfaith understanding? To explore this, we conducted a comparative study between Malaysia and Indonesia. Using a mixed method research approach, we conducted this research. So now I will pass time to Deneille, who will walk through our methodology and also our key findings.
Okay, awesome. For this research, we use a mixed method approach, which is combining both quantitative surveys and qualitative interviews using a snowball sampling technique. We've surveyed 100 former public secondary school students, 48 from Malaysia and 52 from Indonesia. Out of these participants, some had taken courses that covered more than one religion, while others had only studied a single faith tradition. We also conducted in-depth interviews with 3 participants, 2 Malaysian and 1 Indonesian, who are willing to share more detailed perspectives about their experiences with religious education. We then performed a t-test to compare the average human dignity scores of those who had taken the world religion course versus those who hadn't. While the p-value of 0.0557 was slightly above the conventional threshold for statistical significance, we still observed a higher mean score for the group that had taken the course. This suggests a positive trend worth exploring further in the future, studies with a larger sample. From the survey results, we also learned that 69% of the participants said that they would be interested, either very or somewhat, in taking world religion courses if it were available during their school years. However, participants also identified some challenges. The most common one was a lack of qualified teachers, mentioned by 32% of respondents. On the other hand, 36% suggested solutions, such as creating a safe, open space for discussion where students could learn about different religions respectfully and ask questions freely. I'll now pass over the time to Raj.
Right, thank you, Deneille. So for our qualitative interview, give us some of the most powerful insight in this study, our research as well. So when asked about how learning about different religions shaped their understanding of human dignity, participants emphasized values like respect, peace, tolerance, and interfaith understanding. So one of the participants told us, I used to think my religion was the only right one, but learning about others helped me to see how similar our values actually are. Another said, understanding other religions helped me become more patient and less judgmental. To illustrate these common themes, we created a word cloud with the interviews. Words like respect, harmony, understanding, coexistence, and peace appeared most often. So this visual alone shows how exposure to diverse belief systems can shape inclusive attitudes among young people. Despite the challenges such as curriculum limitations or teachers' availability, our study suggests that implementing a world religions course is not only possible but potentially transformative. In conclusion, we believe that a world religions course in secondary schools could serve as a powerful tool for promoting human dignity in diverse societies like Malaysia and Indonesia. It's not about changing beliefs, it's about learning to respect those who believe differently. And that's something we think all students should have the opportunity to learn. Terima kasih.
Dear delegates and friends, aloha. Aloha. What an honor it is for us to speak here. It's such a pleasure to gather with just the most incredible individuals who have done such wonderful things in their communities. I am just so filled with gratitude for this chance that we have to have your attention for a few minutes and to hopefully add something of worth to this ongoing discussion that we have in this conference. So my research partner, Sam, and we are both students here. Well, I guess I'm majoring in intercultural peace building. She has it as a minor, which is a pretty unique field of study here at BYU Hawaii. We are also both majoring in political science. And one thing that has come up multiple times in our studies and has become a particular interest to both of us as we've studied mediation and conflict transformation and really trying to understand what the root of conflict comes from and how we can address it. And so this particular interest is this complex relationship that conflict has with religion. So far here at this conference, we've already heard several perspectives on this topic, especially the potential that religious organizations have in the field of peace building and to be forces for good in establishing peace. And that is something that we have absolutely seen in our personal lives and in our case studies that we have in our classes. But what we wanted to do in our research today was to look at what happens when that potential that religious organizations have for building peace is limited. What happens when government restrictions on religious practice causes that potential to be restricted? What happens when, regardless of what religious affiliation it is, that opportunity for goodness is taken away? So this research looks closely at how government restrictions on religion affect peace and conflict. Okay, so our theory comes primarily from a theory called group regression, which was developed by the psychosociologist Vivek Volkan, and it essentially says that threats to a group cause them to band together to form these large lines of division between them and other groups. They are more likely to see violence as a viable option. And I think this process has many names. We might call it group regression, we might call it tribalism or extremism. And essentially this process is what leads individuals to put their religious identity or their religious affiliation above their religious beliefs. And this is how we see individuals who belong to a faith that teaches others to love each other and to live with compassion, to do horrible things that truly and tragically are so opposed to their beliefs. This is a process that is seen in any religious group, including my own religious organization. So what happens if this threat, if this pressure or this feeling of insecurity that comes from government restrictions on religion were to be lifted? What if we were to engage with each other with compassion and a desire to understand those who are different from us, instead of placing them in a box and ensuring that they remain on the sidelines? What happens if we were willing to set aside our comfort and to reach across the divides? So, what difference can the presence of religious freedom in a country have on conflict in our communities and our countries? Now, as deep as our personal feelings go on this, we are students, and so we decided to take a quantitative analysis approach to the question. We had two hypotheses. The first was that an increase in religious freedom leads to a decrease in the onset of civil war in a country, holding all other things constant. And as we continue this research, we had a second hypothesis, which my partner will get into later. I'm going to breeze through the technical details, but we are happy to answer questions later. Essentially, our data on civil war came from the UDCP conflict data set. Our measure for religious freedom comes from the Varieties of Democracy project. And another factor that we use later comes from the Pew Research Center. We also had several control variables just to try to really see what exactly is religious freedom, what is its effect on civil war. And so here you can see the results of our logistic regressions. And essentially, we can go to the next page. This is showing truly what this relationship is. On a global scale, the more religious freedom that a country has, the less likely it is to go to civil war. In all of the models, as we were holding different factors as constant, we can show that there is a statistically significant relationship between religious freedom and civil war. Now, of course, numbers don't show us everything, but they can help us understand the patterns in our world. They can direct us and our policies and our interactions towards one another. And in my experience, it can also be a good way to convince a skeptic to listen to us when we say that it's important to build bridges between groups, just like the ones that we're building here today. Thank you.
Amazing. Okay, so I'm going to continue. So going back to our second hypothesis here, we saw that there was a different trend on a regional level, specifically within Southeast Asia. And this really piqued our interest, so we wanted to dive more into it. So what we started off with was we looked at what religious freedom looked like in Southeast Asia, and we actually saw the reverse effect, which was a rather shocking find, considering our world data, our global data, was so strong and was so stark. So as you can see here, it's a low number, but it is a significant number that tells us that religious freedom is actually increasing civil war. However, we've been to many of these conferences and we've had amazing discussions with people just like you. And we knew that there had to be more to the story, that religious freedom, with all of its peace builders, with all of its amazing teachings, could not be the result of conflict. So we looked a little bit deeper, and we found several case studies from various countries within Southeast Asia that displayed this new explanation, this new trend or pattern. And this pattern was religions or countries where religions are granted specific privileges compared to maybe the minority. So if there's a majority religion and it sees more attention or more privileges than the minority, and there's that imbalance, when you go and try to meet everyone to the majority's level, so you introduce religious freedom, we see that same trend. So we go back to our idea of group regression. And group regression is, as my partner mentioned, is where a group feels attacked and they act out of character to defend their territory, their rights, their freedoms, their peace. And so that's why we see this interesting correlation, because as many of you know, coming from these Southeast Asian countries, there tends to be a high correlation between nationality and religious identity. And so that's why we see this trend happening, is because there tends to be that feeling of threat or uneasiness of, what does this religious freedom mean for me? I've held this pattern, I know what my life looks like, but now it's changing because everyone around me is now going to have these same rights. And what does that mean for me? And so we wanted to see this in a more quantitative result. So we then controlled, as you can see here in our second hypothesis, we're testing to see how the effects of government privilege therefore affect how religious freedom affects civil war. So it's an effect of an effect. And as you can see, we right here, actually I think it's highlighted on the next one. Yes, right here. That is that relation. So how does it affect it? And we see without a shadow of a doubt that not 100%, but we see without a shadow of a doubt, with a very strong correlation, that when there is government privileges granted to the majority, when you add religious freedom, it is going to have a drastic effect on it. And so we then had this aha moment of, yes, it is not that religious freedom is causing more conflict. It is that there is a shift in cultural practices. There is a shift in the nation that affects everyone, and it's rather drastic as well most times, because you go from having very stark differences to having almost no differences, which can be scary and can feel very threatening at that time. So that's the results that we were able to find. Here's a rather complex graph of what that relationship looks like. So you can see when a government has no privileges granted to the majority, or everyone is considered equal at that time, we see our global trend. So we see conflict going down. However, when you increase to, there is definitely a majority that has more privileges than the minority, you actually see the opposite. So we were able to see that clear explanation. And then this is that same trend, just put in a little bit more simpler, or easier on the eyes, I would say. So in conclusion, me and my partner Hannah, we are devoted to this. We have spent many, many months trying to understand how religious freedom can help us, because like we've mentioned, we've gone to so many of these conferences, and we know that there is a real force for change here if we're able to utilize it in the proper way. And so on a global level, religious freedom undoubtedly helps lower the risk of conflict. However, in countries much like Southeast Asian countries, it also happens in other regions. Hopefully we can continue to research that and bring that back to you next year. However, for the time being, we do know that in these countries that see this government granted privileges, there needs to be a certain care that these new laws are put into place, or these new policies are put into place, because otherwise you're going to have people who feel threatened and uneasy. And so we know that that religious freedom undoubtedly is a great thing, as long as it is gone about in the proper channels, in the proper ways. And we believe that this happens on the grassroots level. So when policymakers or NGOs are looking to get involved and help promote religious freedom, we really do believe that it has to be a cultural change on the grassroots level. It can't be something that's coming from top bottom. And I cannot say enough how passionate we are both about this and how pleased we are with our results. And we would love to discuss it more. We'll be at the back with many of our peers to discuss it. And I hope that we have been able to impact you in a way that you can take this home to your representatives and to your policymakers to try and help and see a change for good. Thank you.